Hello, welcome to this Sky News special. I'm Rob Harris and we're going to be exploring Donald Trump's latest executive order, this one banning transgender women from competing in women's sport. It's certainly contentious, the issue, but it resonated with many voters in the United States in the election in November. Something that Donald Trump has used as a policy on the campaign trail, now turning it into a reality with a stroke of a pen, with a signing ceremony in the White House last night. And ceremony is actually quite a key part of this because a lot of it is about how it looks and the appearance and trying to send out a message, because as we'll explore in the coming minutes, it's a lot more complex in terms of how will this law be enforced and what already exists in the United States and across sport that takes this into account. One thing to note, this is one of more than 50 executive orders already signed by Donald Trump, more than any predecessor at this stage into his presidency, and we're only just about 2 weeks in. And clearly there is an attempt by the showman president to appeal to his base with this sort of issue. But it's something that has been grappling with sport. It's been something that sport has struggled to contend with in recent years, because at the heart of this, which side do you fall on? Do you believe that transgender women taking part in women's events impact the fairness of the sporting competition, potentially endanger fellow competitors in particularly combat sports? Or do you believe that such an act goes against the desire for sport to be inclusive, open, and to promote tolerance? It's something that even entities like the International Olympic Committee haven't come to a clear policy on. And that is particularly notable for this executive order because the next Summer Olympics and Paralympics are in Los Angeles in 2028. And Donald Trump was forceful in his messaging last night in the East Room of the White House, sending out a message to those Olympic bosses that come LA, there should not be transgender women competing in women's sports competitions. Now, how will that be enforced? That is something we're going to explore. Ultimately, Donald Trump did direct the Department for Homeland Security to deny visas to trans women who want to come to LA to compete in women's events. How does that collide with pledges made by the United States at the time of bidding for these games to allow any competitor in from whichever country, even adversaries of the United States? The bid was actually won during Donald Trump's first term. It's something he references quite often, that he never expected to be in office for the Olympics. It's only because he lost the 2020 election, something he brings up quite a lot. The International Olympic Committee today aren't exactly saying much. They're adopting quite a cautious approach. They've just sent me a statement here to Sky News, and they say that following this executive order, they'll be working with respective international sports federations and will continue to explain and discuss the various topics with the relevant authorities. Now, why might they be so vague? They've got their own presidential election, the IOC, coming up in March. One of the key contenders is Lord Coe, currently the boss of World Athletics, one of the sports that has actually introduced a blanket ban 2 years ago on trans women in women's events. And Seb Coe told me in an interview in December that if he is elected, he would explore extending that to the entire Olympics. So that would very much be chiming with Trump's policies. Other candidates, though, the other 6, have not quite been as strong in adopting that Seb Coe position in terms of women's sport eligibility. But it's probably worth for a moment exploring just what this executive order does focus on. And it largely is about college sports, school sports in the US. Entities, that programs that will receive federal funding, that funding which could be cut if they're not complying with this executive order. And it relates to something called Title IX. Now, what the executive order talks about is how in recent years, by allowing, as they call it, men to compete in women's sport, that is transgender women, it is demeaning, unfair and dangerous to women and girls, and denies women and girls the equal opportunity to participate and excel in competitive sports. And they talk about how they'll deny all funding to programs that deprive girls and women of athletic opportunities. This does impact things like the NCAA, college sport, which is huge in the United States, a lot of money involved in it. And there have been some very high profile races that have had attention when transgender women have participated in these events. Leah Thomas is one of them. She was a swimmer, the first to win a particular freestyle category in 2022, the first openly transgender athlete to win such a title. Now, she went on to try to appeal to compete internationally, but World Aquatics is one of those sports that indeed does ban anyone who's been through male puberty from competing in women's races. They are, though, a sport that created a new third open, who creates an open category that transgender athletes would potentially be eligible for. But her appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport was attempting to overturn it was overturned, but she claimed that they would be invalid and lawful and discriminatory these laws, but she's not managed to succeed at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. But a very high profile incident. We see these fairly occasionally in the United States, but it's important to focus on perhaps who would this have impacted at the Paris Olympics last year. In Paris, if such a ban had been in place, if transgender women, athletes who'd been through male puberty and then had transitioned to identify as female, then would any have been banned? Well, no, there were no transgender women competing in Paris at the Olympics. There was one competitor at the Paralympics. There were transgender men who were competing, but there was a very high profile case of the boxers. Now, Iman Khalif, who went on to win women's boxing gold, the Algerian, there was an intense focus on her gender eligibility. There was a gender eligibility test she supposedly failed. It was conducted by a boxing federation that the IOC says is discredited, so it should not be regarded. But it's something Donald Trump seized on when he was going on the campaign trailers, bringing it up continuously. It was referenced again yesterday, and Donald Trump does call Khalif a man, even though she does say she was born as a woman and identifies as a woman. And at the time, the IOC was saying, if your passport says you're female, you are a woman. But Donald Trump will certainly have her in his sights in saying that she should not be someone who would be allowed to compete in the Olympics. And, you saw there in Paris how one athlete can have the world's attention on them, and that does put them in a very difficult position. She talked about how much it impacted her mental well-being, and that is what we're hearing from LGBTQ plus groups in the last 24 hours about how the already heavily marginalised trans community feels even more discriminated against based on this order. But there are so many other groups who are part of this conversation. The Alliance Defending Freedom talks about it being a long overdue message that sends a message to women and girls, your rights matter. So you get a sense there how it did resonate with so many voters. But how important was Donald Trump's executive order really shifting things in the United States in terms of a nationwide policy? Because 25 states already have laws actually resembling Trump's new executive order. So this effectively wasn't required to change anything in terms of sporting participation in those states. These mostly Republican-controlled states have been curbing transgender rights for some time, whereas we've seen Democratic states adding more protections. And what we've then seen in these sort of 25 odd states that have introduced these transgender sports eligibility restrictions is just how difficult such policies are to enforce. Because how do you prove an athlete is not eligible? Do you check birth certificates? Other states have affidavits that are required from parents for school sports, or checks from healthcare providers. And then if you do rely on a birth certificate, well, you can change documents in some states. And what you do is you potentially, in some places, lead to parents, other students, reporting their fellow students to the authorities that they might suspect athletes are not biological girls. And that means they're judging them on how they look and could be taking on their appearances as something that is judging their gender. And they might be stereotyping certain male attributes. So we've seen just how challenging it is to enforce across states. Idaho was the first state in 2020 to pass a law prohibiting transgender women and girls from playing in female-designated sports teams. And that would have required, at the time, a health exam and consent forms being provided. But one transgender woman sued to block the law because she would not have qualified to compete in a university athletics team due to the tests being required to check on her biological sex. In West Virginia, there was a version of the law that relied on birth certificates and physical exams, and the law was blocked because a transgender girl aged 11 issued a challenge because she was unable to compete on a female cross-country team. So we just get a sense of how complex it is, and we've seen it with many of Trump's executive orders through the first term as well, how they can be subject to legal challenges. And this is clearly something that we could be seeing in the days and weeks ahead, even as Trump has instructed his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to go to the International Olympic Committee on the high level to demand that they introduce this blanket ban. And it's something that is clearly has been pushed and advanced by Trump. He's very determined to try to use this as his agenda. He said he'd introduce a ban on day one. In fact, on day one, he issued an order which said there are only two genders. There's only male and female. You can't count non-binary in that. Again, and it's complex, another issue because there are non-binary athletes who compete at the Olympics. They competed, a Canadian player, Quinn, at the last Women's World Cup, the FIFA event as well. We have the FIFA World Cup coming to the United States, the men's version, in 2026. So, there we've seen a very close alliance between Donald Trump and FIFA. Will he put pressure on FIFA to adopt some of his policies? So there is a lot being digested from this executive order now. And perhaps, as we have some closing thoughts, and you can check articles and videos we've done on Sky News in recent weeks, one a couple of weeks ago around Trump's inauguration, which featured the wrestler Mack Beggs, who said, as a transgender wrestler, the majority of my community is scared because it's not just about the sports, it's about overall our rights being taken away as a whole. Beggs is a transgender man who dreams of competing in UFC, UFC being a huge base for Donald Trump to gain support. But then there's a female cyclist I spoke to, part of the Icons advocacy group, and she's a Democrat, well, certainly registered Democrat, and she said that her vote choice was wavering this time. She wouldn't say if she actually did vote for Trump, but certainly said that in terms of his transgender policy, the fact that Donald Trump has been advancing this ban on trans women, women's sports, was extremely encouraging, she said, for the majority of us, regardless if your policy affiliation is Republican or Democrat. It's an extremely important, necessary step. So, some point people might be saying, why is this such a Trump priority? There's the economy, there's the Middle East, so many other matters, immigration, but it's certainly something that has resonated across the United States and something that many people will be debating over. And ultimately, this executive order, this debate comes down to which side do you fall on? Do you believe that a transgender woman has the right to be recognised as a woman and to be gay, having full rights to be able to compete in women's sports? Or do you believe that if you've gone through male puberty, you were assigned male at birth and are now a transgender woman, that those physical advantages, the skeletal advantages that you gain having gone through puberty give you a physical advantage, a competitive advantage that distorts the entire notion of sporting competition? Well, if you do oppose it, Donald Trump said, nobody's going to be able to do a damn thing. So we'll wait to see how this unfolds. More details on this on the Sky News website and app, more videos as well on there, a new explainer in the last 24 hours from me as well. But thank you for following as we explore the fallout from this executive order and try to explain it just a bit more.